Perhaps of all outdoor amusements, rowing is one of the healthiest for ladies, besides being one of the most enjoyable. Just at first, of course, learning to row is rather tiring, but very soon one will find how far one can go without feeling any fatigue. For a girl who is learning, the great thing is to have someone who can row well to tell her all about it. And then, if she will only row bow and keep her eyes on strokes back, without looking around every minute to see what her oar is doing, she will find she will soon get on. The great secret, of course, is rowing is not to dip the oar too deeply in the water, but merely to cover the blade and then pull it well towards one. In going forward, one ought to feather one's oar an inch above the water and get well forward before raking another stroke. Sculling is really quite as easy, if not easier, than rowing, and though at the start a beginner finds the sculls are apt to get rather unmanageable, still, after a little practice, she will much prefer it. Rowing is more one-sided than sculling, and the latter is naturally the better exercise, as both arms have a freer motion than in rowing. But above all things, one should remember that the stretcher is made for use, not ornament, and that one cannot use it too much. So many ladies make the great mistake of merely rowing with their arms, when, if they only knew it, they could save themselves half the labor by bending forward and bearing on the stretcher and pulling each stroke. It is essential for every English girl to learn to row, and no one can say anything against a lady rowing, though of course there are some folks who would rather run down anything that a lady does in the way of athletic exercises, more for the sake of argument than anything else. 20 years ago it was very different. It was not considered comme il faut for a lady to row, and she never dreamt of doing so. Now, however, that everything has changed, it is clearly to be seen that it is the very best thing for her, and affords an amusement that, having once gone in for, she would be very sorry to give up. Living nearly all the summer by the river gives one many opportunities of observing the river world, and it is often remarked that ladies know as much about managing a boat as men. On the Thames, between Cookham and Wargrave, ladies have for some time indulged in a great deal of rowing. At the former place a few years ago, a ladies' 8 was started, and the crew were all well trained, and kept good time, etc. At the Wargrave Town Regatta, ladies have this last year or two come very much to the fore. Double sculling and punting races have been competed for by them with much success. A gondola this year at Henley Regatta, pioneered by a lady, went along well and kept clear of the other boats. A ladies' 8 was also to be seen paddling up and down, and the rowers here again seemed proficient in the art. Last year there appeared at Marlow Regatta an 8 which had come about 7 miles down the river and had been successfully steered through crowded locks, and the rowers looked none the worse for the long pull. Ladies who are not adept on the water should not attempt to go out alone in boats and punts. This year at Henley, 3 most beautifully gowned ladies appeared in a punt, and, as everyone knows, a punt is, for an amateur, a by no means easy thing to manage. The 3 fair occupants found themselves, after they had tried for some time unsuccessfully to move along, struggling in the water, with the punt gaily floating away. They had had quite enough of the river by the time they were helped and pulled onto terra firma, and it was thought then by a good many who saw their deplorable condition that this would be a lesson to them for the future. But alas, how perverse human nature is. The following day, the same thoughtless 3 were again in their punt, running into the other boats with the sweetest unconcern, and evidently enjoying themselves very much. Our English summers are so short and uncertain now that it is not always easy to find a day for an excursion on the river. It is by no means an uncommon sight to see a gaily dressed party starting off in the high spirits, to come back, a few hours later, drenched and depressed, with the cushions of the boat perched up in various ways to afford shelter to the occupants. But why will some people go on the river fashionably attired? They look so much nicer and cooler and smarter in plain serge skirts and cotton shirts. Only the latter should most certainly be fresh and clean, not tumbled and crumpled, looking as though they had been worn every day, in all weathers, from the beginning of the boating season. This summer, I went off for a picnic on the river in a large, heavy family boat, packed pretty closely. At starting, everyone was volunteering to row, and there were numerous young lady beginners, all most keen to show off their knowledge. Coming home, however, we were overtaken by a storm of rain when a long way from any sheltering trees. The two lady rowers quite collapsed at the first raindrops, and entangled their oars, and caught crabs, and were quite unable to continue rowing. There was not one of the huddled up mass in the stern of the boat at all willing to take their places. Meanwhile, the rain came down in torrents, till the boat inside was soaking, and little pools and rivers were coursing along the bottom of it. At last a middle-aged lady and one of the men volunteered their services. They had at starting quite led us to suppose that they were first-rate rowers. The lady was bow and stroke, seizing the sculls in a businesslike way, began. He placed them flat on the water, and then with an "Are you ready?" went suddenly forward, and shot back, feathering his oars through the water, and coming into violent collision with Bow's sculls. Meanwhile, Bow was chopping her oars up and down in a sharp, decisive manner, without pulling them through the water at all. It need hardly be added that it was long, with this style of rowing, before we gained a place at shelter, arriving in by no means such an amicable mood as when we started. But river picnics are undoubtedly great fun, and damp sticks for the fire and spiders in the teacups only add to the amusement. It is often at these picnics that the best oars grow suddenly lazy, and prefer sitting in the bows and being rowed to showing off their own skill. Steering a family boat requires no small amount of patience, as amateur oars find great pleasure in putting a lot of blame on cocks when they find the boat will not go as fast as they would like. It is much easier to learn to row in a heavy boat, as then, however much you move about, or however many crabs are caught, there's no fear of upsetting, and afterwards a light boat will be found a pleasant change.